of roundtables that we are having on Hindutva and its various dimensions. And grateful to Professor Arvind Sharma, who is presently spending some time in India and is finding some time for us from his busy schedule. Hi, Namaskar. So this is he had given a Vimarsh. We started this lecture series with a Vimarsh talk, and that was in May. And after that, we've had two roundtables, and this is the third roundtable. And we will be having one Vimarsh public lecture end of this month. And that will complete the 5-lecture series on Hindutva. And today we are discussing Hindutva and history. That is the topic given. And just a brief introduction of the speakers. Of course, you have met him already. But Professor Sharma is the Burks Professor of Comparative Religions in the School of Religious Studies at McGill University in Canada. And he has been teaching and researching this for more than 3 decades. He is formerly of the Indian Administrative Service, and then he left IAS and took up this field. And he has written several books, and I think some of you have probably read these books. And if you haven't, I think you should at least have some acquaintance with the subjects that we have covered. I think comparative religions is extremely important for us to understand ourselves and also to see Hinduism in relation to others. And I think it is a very productive field, and we should, even those who are not, studying religion per se as discipline, and like most of us, more interested in international relations or international politics. Even for us to, we should understand religion, because religion essentially, whether you are agnostic or you are a believer on one religion or the other, the entire population of the world is impacted. So in some way or the other, you are impacted. And also, religions have had a huge impact on the evolution of civilizations of the world, etc. So we cannot ignore, I think in international politics, we should not ignore the impact of religions, whichever way it is. So it is in that spirit that we are also approaching Professor Sharma's lecture series. We also have 2 discussants, and I welcome Srimati Manushi Sinha, who has written several books, including the 8th Avatar, Blue Vanquisher, and Saffron Swords, which was a bestseller. She's an independent researcher on Indian history and ancient temples. She's the founder of a website, myindiamyglory.com, which is an e-magazine that describes Bharat from ancient to present with special focus on history, culture, and heritage. And she has spoken at various platforms. She is also a blogger, and she has been educated at Don Bosco School, Dumduma, and graduated from Women's College, Tinsukia, Assam. She is a postgraduate in English literature from the University of Pune. Actually, I saw your name in one of the books. What is that? Amit, what's that young fellow who has written a book on? क्या नाम है? नहीं. कौन सी किताब थी अभी जो आई है very recently? And you had, I think, encouraged him to write that book. Amit Agarwal, yes, Amit Agarwal's book. And I found it very interesting. He's talking about this. And you have written a forward. That's what I saw your name, and I asked him to get in touch with you. We want some new voices also to come in. And so welcome, ma'am, for accepting this invitation to be a discussant to this very important lecture. And also Dr. Ankur Kakkar, who is an assistant professor at the Center for Indic Studies, Indus University. He is a research scholar and student of Indian history, culture, and philosophy. He has done his doctorate in history from South Asia Institute, University of Heidelberg, Germany. Heidelberg has done a lot of work on Hindu civilization, Indian civilization, etc. I think the Professor Mitra.
Yes, Professor Mitra.
He's come back now, I think.
Yeah,
He's done a lot of work on Sanskrit and so on. Heidelberg is a very strong center. So I'm glad that you are here with us. You have a doctoral thesis on education reform movement in colonial Punjab, 1888 to 1920. And he was supervised by Geeta Dharampal, who is a daughter of historian Shri Dharampal. Of course, Dharampal is a very big name. And you have a postgraduate degree in history from School of History, Classics and Archaeology at the University of Edinburgh, UK. And he is one of the faculty members for the online course titled Bharatvarsha, History of India in 25 Lessons. Actually, I've seen this course and being advertised. I'm glad you're a part of it and you're with us. Yes, CISindus.org. In fact, I would suggest that some of the youngsters who want to have this course on Indian civilization should look at this. I have seen, I think, one of those courses. Very good, very interesting. So we have Professor Shashi Prabha Kumar, who is a distinguished fellow with us at the VIF, a doyen of Indian philosophy, ancient Indian studies, Vedic literature. As she's also the chairperson of the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla. Recently, she did a seminar on Ayurveda, an excellent 2-day seminar. Unfortunately, had to be online because there was so much of rains that we couldn't go to Shimla. But I think those 18 lectures and some top people who came, they not only gave us some information and knowledge about Ayurveda, but about Indian mindset. How Indian, I think I'm glad that ma'am, you are here, and she's also associated with Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, and she also gave us a series of lectures on Indian philosophy some years ago, and we're trying to bring out a book shortly. Recently, she has also compiled about 100 or so verses from the Rig Veda, mostly from Rig Veda and some Upanishads, only from the 4 Vedas, which focus on Swasti, on Shanti, and on education, environment, etc., just to outline and emphasize to what extent the Vedic rishis talked about these things and how relevant these issues are as today, and very much so in the international discourse. This is the reason why, and we're trying to bring this book very shortly, and hopefully before the G20. So I'm very happy that you're here now. And we also welcome Ma'am Faye, who is come with Professor Arvind Sharma and many other colleagues here. So thank you very much. And now I request Professor Arvind Sharma to take the floor.
Namaste. Friends, I know that at the end of this session, you would like to put questions to me about what I might have said. But I'd like to start this lecture by asking you all a simple question. And I think you have a pencil and paper. Yes. The question is, excuse me, what do you regard as the greatest failure of Hinduism? What do you regard as the greatest failure of Hinduism? Okay, now, I think that if we analyze, or we were to analyze, the responses which have been offered to this question, we would be able to classify them in two groups. One being of those who identify the major failure of Hinduism in terms of its theology, idolatry, polytheism, and so on, or in terms of society, caste, untouchability, misogyny, and so on, or in terms of its economy, poverty, backwardness, and so on. All these answers could be placed in one basket or category. To another category or basket would belong all those answers which identified Hinduism's greatest failure as political and military. It is this response which I would like to explore further today. May I ask how many of us identified political or military failure as Hinduism's main failure? Just two.
There are other aspects as well.
Yeah, but the main, greatest failure, this is fine. Thanks. Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. It would be tempting to assume that people who subscribe to the kind of Hinduism associated with the figures of Radha Mohan Roy, Swami Vivekananda, Mahatma Gandhi, and so on, would identify Hinduism's greatest failure in terms of theology or society or economy, rather than in political or military terms. And Hindutva thinkers like B.D. Savarkar, M.S. Golwalkar, Sitaram Goel, and others would identify it in terms of politics. Such an assumption, however, could be misleading. It is true that most people who claim to be Hindus, in the usual sense of the term, will probably not identify the main failure of Hindu civilization in political and military terms, as we just saw. However, a propounder of modern Hinduism of such repute as Professor S. Radhakrishnan has not failed to do so. In his well-known work, Eastern Religions and Western Thought, he refers to the political failure of Hinduism at least 5 times in the span of 3 pages. He writes, while dealing with the criticism of what he called the Hindu ideal, that these criticisms have, I quote him now, obvious reference to the political failure of India. Despite her profession of exalted spiritual ideas, her leaders dwelt in prayer and let the legions pass by. Solitude and isolation were the roots of their existence. At best, they fed the deer and held converse at night with the stars, healed the sick, and preached the word of God. End of quote. And then he goes on to add, I quote him again, the criticism is partly justified. End of quote. After devoting a few paragraphs to justifying the Hindu ideas which he upholds, he writes again, and I quote, all the same, Indian culture has failed to give political expression to its ideas. India has suffered for this negligence. Politically, politically she has failed. These are his words. Even while trying to defend the Hindu ideal, as he sees it, he refers to this failure again. It is not right to complain that India has failed because she has followed after things spiritual. She has failed because she has not followed after them sufficiently. End of quote. Although S. Radhakrishnan does not fail to recognize that the failure of Hindu civilization is political, he does not pursue the point after these brief references. Most of his writings are devoted to Hindu philosophy and spirituality. What was marginal in the case of the Hinduism of Professor S. Radhakrishnan is central to the Hindutva of V.D. Savarkar. Whose understanding of Hinduism is deeply influenced by its political failure. As this political failure is part of the history of Hinduism, the relationship of Hindutva and history takes on a special character. This theme of Hinduism and its political failure is an important element in his thought. As he puts it, and I quote him now, Hindutva is not a word, but a history. End of quote. Interestingly, while he wrote his book Hindutva, or Who is a Hindu in English, the books in which he describes the history of the Hindu people were written in Marathi. Three such books stand out: The Indian War of Independence, Hindu Patshahi, a book on Maratha history, and Six Glorious Epochs of Indian History. In view of Savarkar's assertion that Hindutva is not a word but a history, one must now then turn to analyzing Hindutva in the context of Indian history. It is not my intention in the course of this lecture to present a detailed analysis of V.D. Savarkar's work on Hindutva as history. This task has already been undertaken by Professor Vinayak Chaturvedi of the University of California, Irvine, in his book, Hindutva and Violence, V.D. Savarkar and the Politics of History. What I would like to talk about instead is how an exposure to the history of India through the lens of Hindutva compels one to re-examine conventional ideas and even norms. If one chooses to view Indian history from a political perspective, which is the Hindutva perspective, then one confronts a salient fact. It turns out that Hindu civilization has been subjected to foreign rule for an extremely extended period of time. This period is sometimes described as extending or covering 800 years, as extending to or covering 800 years. If we take the establishment of the slave dynasty in India early in the 13th century as the starting point, or as extending over 1,000 years rather than just 800, if we take the 17 invasions of Mahmud of Ghazna at the cusp of the 10th and the 11th centuries as the starting point, or even 1,200 years, if we take the invasion of Sindh by Muhammad ibn Qasim as our starting point in the 8th century. Historians may regard the last two figures as somewhat exaggerated, but even sober historians will find it hard to deny that Hindus have effectively been under foreign subjugation in several parts, if not the whole of India, first during the Muslim period of Indian history and then under the British. In fact, one major difference between the way professional historians view Indian history and Hindutva historians view it is that professional historians usually consider India as under foreign rule only during the British period of Indian history, while Hindutva historians consider the period of foreign rule as including the so-called Muslim period. When one confronts this harsh fact of such a prolonged period of foreign rule, then two paradoxical questions arise. One, how did Hindu civilization survive this prolonged period of foreign domination and still remain more or less intact? Or in other words, as the Americans say, it must be doing something right that it managed to survive. But the second question is, what was responsible for such an outcome, that is, of this prolonged fluctuation? Or to use an expression made popular by Bernard Lewis, what went wrong? So on the one hand, we have to ask, why did we survive? On the other hand, you ask, but what went wrong? Perhaps one can impart some emotional substance to this paradox by reflecting on how this reality has been expressed in poetry. Echoes of the first question can be heard in the famous Qawmi Tarana of Allama Iqbal. यूनान और मिस्र और रोमा सब मिट गए जहां से बाकी मगर है अब तक नामो निशान हमारा कुछ बात है कि हस्ती मिटती नहीं हमारी सदियों रहा है दुश्मन दौरे जहां हमारा. To translate, Greece, Egypt and Rome were all wiped out, but we still survived. There must be something which enables us to do so, even though the world has been hostile to us for centuries. And the echo of the second question can be heard in the following Urdu verse. अहले खिरत से मैं पूछूं क्या बात है जंग के मैदान में फिर हम हराए जाते हैं एक बार नहीं दो बार नहीं. To translate, I asked the wise, why is it that in the field of battle we lose again and again, or have lost again and again, not just once, but many times? Any sensitive Hindu reflecting on these two questions might begin to entertain certain disturbing thoughts when confronted with the atrocities committed against the Hindus during these periods. It is not impossible that once one looks at the political history of India from the perspective of Hinduism, I beg your pardon, rather, Hindutva, sentiments of revenge might surface towards Muslims and Christians, with whom the atrocities suffered by the Hindus are associated. One must, however, not only learn to think clearly, but also to feel clearly. Revenge is a base sentiment. To seek revenge is to become unjust in the pursuit of justice. I shall revert to this theme of historical justice later. At the moment, I would just like to point out how deeply disturbing the Hindutva perspective of history can be. As a student of Indian history, I was naturally familiar with the name and achievements of Shivaji and found the noble behavior he displayed in dealing with the Muslim women who fell into Maratha hands almost inspiring. I have here in mind the well-known incident from the life of Shivaji. It is said that when the daughter-in-law of the Subedar of Kalyan, I think Gauhar Bai by name, who was reputed to be extremely beautiful, fell into the hands of the Maratha forces, and she was presented to Shivaji. Shivaji, upon looking at her, is supposed to have said, If my mother had been as beautiful, I would have been a handsome man. She then had her return honorably to her relatives. Some years ago, while teaching at McGill University, I had occasion to interact with one of our graduate students. When in the course of our conversation, I referred appreciatively to the chivalrous attitude displayed by Shivaji on this occasion, he shocked me by asking, "Don't you think it was unwise of him to do so? Don't you think it was unwise of him to do so?" After I recovered from the shock of hearing him say this, I asked him, "Why would one consider it unwise?" He replied, "Do you realize what it means in the long run? When Hindu women fall into the hands of the Mughals, or rather fell into the hands of the Mughals, they were absorbed in the harem and contributed to the strength of the Muslims. But when Muslim women fell into the hands of the Hindu rulers, they were respectfully returned. Who reaps the demographic dividend?" I could not deny the uncomfortable fact that such Hindu nobility had adverse implications for relative Hindu-Muslim demography from a Hindu point of view. At the same time, I felt deeply uncomfortable at having to question the behavior of Shiva. And I have not been able to resolve this so far. I learned subsequently that the graduate student was echoing the views of V.D. Savarkar, who had apparently referred to such behavior as Sadguna Vikriti, the perversion of virtue. One can see in this tension the competing claims of dharma and artha as the perspectives from within the Hindu tradition. The dharma would favor the behavior of Shivaji. The artha would ask this very question. Yeah. In terms of realpolitik, the point made by V.D. Savarkar was unassailable. At the same time, one feels compelled to uphold the norm established by Shivaji. Is the political suspension of the ethical, which is what artha would mean, is the political suspension of the ethical? Perhaps one should not return evil with evil, but with justice. If one takes one's cue from Confucius, who was once asked, "Should we return evil with good?" And he replied, "If we return evil with good, what would we return good with? Therefore, return good with good and evil with justice." And this brings us back to the issue of historical justice. Let me be very clear about what I am trying to say. I am here raising the whole question of justice in a historical context as a result of using the Hindutva lens on history. The West, perhaps, on account of its history of imperialism, has avoided the issue. Western human rights discourse talks about all kinds of justice, but it does not talk about historical justice. It knows only biography, not history. One could say the same about the Indian Constitution, whose preamble reads as follows: "We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic, and political, and then liberty and equality and fraternity, do on this day give to ourselves this Constitution. This preamble to the Constitution speaks of social justice, of economic justice, and of political justice. It does not speak of historical justice. But we as a people are reared in an ethos suffused in the idea of karma, which never loses an address. The Hindu does not just live in a universe, he or she lives in a just universe. There is some awareness of this dimension, even in the West, but it has rarely been given concrete expression. Thomas Jefferson came close to doing so when he remarked, I quote him now, I tremble for my country when I think that God is just. End of quote. The original draft of the American Declaration of Independence, as drafted by him, actually contained a reference to slavery, but it was removed from the final text by the intervention of the Assembly. What I am suggesting is that Hindutva in our times should identify and uphold the principle of historical justice as a fundamental need for our time. The point I would like to raise at this juncture is the following. We know that certain sections of the Hindu community have been discriminated against in the history of Hinduism, such as the Shudras and women. So the question arises, what should the Hindus do now in relation to these groups in the spirit of historical justice? Is it too much to suggest that the Hindu community would accept the responsibility for providing healthcare, education, and other forms of assistance to these communities out of its own resources, free of charge, in the spirit of balancing the scales of historical justice? The suggestion raises the obvious question. Where will the funds come from for this to be accomplished? This could be done through the revenues generated by the Hindu temples. Is it not the duty of the Hindu community to use surplus revenues generated by its various temples for compensating these members of the Hindu community who have been discriminated against, let us say, for the past 3,000 years? It's a round figure. Some of us might wonder whether the Hindu temples generate enough revenues to do so. Allow me, therefore, to share some figures regarding the financial status of 5 leading Hindu temples. The Tirumal Tirupati Venkateshwar temple, located in Tirupati and commonly known as the Tirupati temple, has an estimated net worth of over 2.5 lakh crores in assets, including bank and gold deposits, gold jewelry, and properties across the country. Other state-controlled temples of notably high monetary worth are the Vaishno Devi temple in Katra, Jammu and Kashmir, which receives around rupees 500 crores in annual donations. The Shirdi Sai Baba temple in Maharashtra, which received an estimated 400 crore donations in 2022. The Guruvayurappan temple in Guruvayur, Kerala, which collects an estimated rupees 5.75 crore monthly, and the Siddha Vinayak temple in Mumbai, whose average income ranges from 48 to 125 crores annually. From 48 to 125 crores annually. Even non-state controlled temples are impressive assets. The Padmanabh Swami temple in Kerala possesses an estimated worth, amounting to rupees 100,000 crores. It is sobering to realize that the provisions for education and health separately in India's 2023 to 24 budget released this year were just 1 lakh crore separately for each. It may be of interest to us that as soon as the new Maharashtrian government came to power in 2019, led by the Shiv Sena, 3 Hindu temples were divided among the 3 main parties who were partners in the coalition. The Siddha Vinayak Mandir Trust of Bombay came under the effective control of the Shiv Sena. The Shirdi Sai Baba Mandir Clay Trust came under the effective control of the NCP, the National Congress Party, and the Vitthal Rukmani Mandir Trust of Pandharpur came under the effective control of the INC, the Indian National Congress. We are secular. Why are secular state governments in India administering Hindu temples? The fundamental principle of secularism is the separation of church and state. The secular government should make sure that it delivers on the secular functions it is supposed to perform, fundamentally protecting the country against foreign invasions, preserving internal order, securing economic growth, and so on. It should get out of this business of running Hindu temples and hand them back to the Hindus. And the Hindus should use the resources generated by these temples for ensuring historical justice for those who were deprived of certain rights in the past. I know what I am suggesting, no matter how reasonable it might appear to me, is likely to appear radical to you or to many in the audience. I would therefore like to pursue this point in some detail. The student of the history of Hinduism cannot but feel pained at the way in which the tradition seems to have discriminated against Shudras and women. The root of this discrimination, as I see it, lies in the exclusion of Shudras and women from Vedic study and ritual. This meant that the majority of Hindus, the majority which consisted of Shudras and women, were denied direct access to the most sacred part of Hindu literature, namely the Vedas. From this disability followed other disabilities. And these groups came to suffer a subordinate status in Hinduism, well encapsulated in the expression popularized by Arundhati Roy, children of a lesser god. Now, I do not wish to pile up the agony here. So, I'm not indulging in self-flagellation. There were redeeming features to the situation. For instance, the scriptural exclusion of Shudras and women did not involve soteriological exclusion. They were fully entitled to moksha. Only in their case, this was not to be achieved through the study of the Vedas. There is clear evidence that the tradition was not unanimous in denying access of Vedic study to Shudras and women either. This fact is not commonly recognized. It is therefore worth quoting the Bharadwaj Fraud Sutra on this account. Vidyate chaturthasya varnasya agnadhyam ityekam na vidyate ityaparam. Some are of the view that the fourth varna, Shudras, are entitled to Vedic study and ritual, others think they are not. One Hindu thinker, Badari, is clearly mentioned as advancing the case of the right of the Shudras to Vedic study and ritual. Similarly, the Gobil Griya Sutra clearly implies that women also have the right to perform Vedic rites. Moreover, one could explain a number of developments within what we now call the Hindu tradition as an attempt to deal with this discrimination and, in effect, to minimize and to even practically remove it. Indeed, something of a paradox seems to have characterized this situation. A tradition which imposed certain restrictions seemed equally anxious to undo the effects of these restrictions. For instance, the Mahabharata came to be called the fifth Veda. But unlike the other four Vedas, it is accessible to all, making the Bhagavad Gita, which is a part of it, one of the most widely read and revered texts within the Hindu tradition. According to a recent study, more than 80% of all Hindus regard it as the word of God. In fact, the Bhagavad Gita seems to provide an interesting example of the paradox I just cited. It is well known that some of its verses almost read like verses from the Upanishads. Almost, but not quite. For instance, verse 20 in second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Nujayate Mriyate Vakadachit, seems to repeat Katha Upanishad, chapter 2, verse 18. Was it the case that the Bhagavad Gita did not want to reproduce the verse exactly, consciously? Because as a verse from the Upanishad, its access would become restricted. But if you modify it, it ceases to be a sacred text in that sense. In this way, it could be made accessible to all the members of the community, smuggled out, as it were. Does the slight emendation of the text conceal a profound hermeneutical mood? In the Puranas, the exclusion of certain women, the exclusion of certain men and women from Vedic study and ritual is presented as an exemption. The Bhagavad Purana also refers to itself as an attempt to circumvent this provision. It clearly says this. And so does the Natya Shastra of Bharat. This might explain why so many of the religious texts of classical Hinduism are in the shloka meter. It has been a puzzle. When the meters are assigned to in the Vedic text, to the various varnas, Anuštubha is assigned to the Shudra. The shloka is the form of the Anuštubha. Nevertheless, it remains a social fact that women and Shudras, by and large, were excluded from access to the Vedic tradition, and that this should not have happened, to put it mildly. I would like to conclude by revisiting the role of temple in Hindu society. In our own times, when we visit a temple, we do so mostly to perform acts of religious piety. But this could be a consequence of the way the role of the temple has been diminished in the life of the Hindu as a result of the Islamic, the British, and the secular assault on it. During the Muslim period, many temples were physically destroyed. A figure of about 40,000 is usually cited, which seems reasonable. During the British period, the East India Company went on maximizing its profits, eliminated charitable activities of the temples, such as providing social services like free food. Even today, there is a temple in Vaikom, Kerala, where every night the priests cry out 3 times before the temple gates are closed, Attara Pashamikara Rundu, or in Tamil, sorry, in English, this is in Malayalam. In English, is there anybody hungry who needs a meal? I'm sure I mispronounced Malayali, so I beg your pardon for that. Evidence from Tamil Nadu also shows that medical treatment was provided by temples. An inscription dated in the year 1068 and found on the eastern wall of the Tirumukkudal Venkatesh Perumal temple refers to a hospital attached to the temple complex and even mentions the head of the unit, other functionaries, and the stock of medicine. And it lists the stock of medicine. This temple is located in Tirumukkudal village in Madurantakam, Chengalpattu, Tamil Nadu. What I am trying to say is that, contrary to popular impression, temples in ancient India provided free education, training in the arts, medical help, financial assistance, and so on, in addition to being centers of worship. They served as a community center. They served as a community center, a school, a hospital, and even a bank. I do not see why they should not renew providing these facilities once again, especially to women and Shudras throughout India, free of charge, once the control of the Hindu temples reverts to the Hindu community. This is how the Hindu community can compensate women and Shudras for having been unfair to them for more than 3,000 years. It is often proposed by liberal thinkers that Hindutva should keep up with the times. The liberal thinkers in India often say this. Hindutva should keep up with the times. If, however, Hindutva adopted this approach, then the times will have to keep up with Hindutva. Thanks for the privilege of your time and attention.
Thank you, Professor Sharma, for that very thought-provoking lecture. As usual, I think in earlier lectures also some very interesting suggestions and proposals you had made. And before we come to the discussion, I think we should now bring in our discussants. So where do I begin? Maybe I should start with Manushi Sinhaji to, maybe you can have about 10-12 minutes to discuss the lecture and then.
Namaste, Vande Mataram. I'd like to thank Vivekananda International Foundation for inviting me to be a part of this session, wherein we are discussing on the topic Hindutva and history. So what is Hindutva? So I will speak in the contemporary context. Hindutva, Hindu plus Tattva is Hindutva. Tattva means true essence. So Hindutva means the true essence of being a Hindu. So there is no difference between Hinduism and Hindutva. Hinduism is Hindutva and Hindutva is Hinduism. But in contemporary times, Hindutva is being differentiated from Hinduism. So Hindutva is used by most of the people erroneously to define or identify the fanatical aspect of Hinduism or to describe the staunch believers of Hinduism. So in this context, if you are a staunch Hindu and if you religiously follow your traditions and rituals, and if you display your Hindu identity in public, like sporting a tilak, wearing kalawa, wearing a dhoti, sporting bindi, bangles in public, you will be tagged under Hindutva. Wear saffron, you are a Hindutvavadi. And address Bharat as Bharat Mata, symbolizing her as Devi, and hail slogans Bharat Mata ki Jai, you will be tagged under Hindutva. If you advocate for the protection of cows and speak against cow slaughter, you will be tagged as a Hindutvavadi goon. You speak for the nation, present yourself as a nationalist, work for the nation, you will be tagged under Hindutva. And if you speak about what is happening in present all around against Hinduism, the genocide, the conversion, the atrocities being faced by the Hindus across the country, you will be tagged under Hindutva. So speak about history, what has exactly happened in the past, you will be tagged under Hindutva. Actually, all of these events, activities, have been part of our culture, our Hinduism, since time immemorial. And in the present context, if people tag me as Hindutvavadi or under Hindutva, I will take it and wear it as a badge of honor because it identifies my thousands of years old civilizational identity. It identifies me as a true Hindu. So in the context of history, like for example, the conclave, this is a conclave. There is a legacy of hosting conclaves and conferences since the Upanishadic times. So we all know about Rishi Suta holding a conference with many rishis in Narasimharanyam, now in Uttar Pradesh. And Suta narrated the Mahabharata and the Puranas to the rishis. Then Raja Janak of Mithila, he used to invite scholars from across the country and hold conferences in his court. And this tradition has been carried forward. And today, Vivekananda International Foundation is going along with the same legacy. So India is the oldest surviving civilization in the world, as Professor Arvind Sarmaji also said, how we as a civilization survived when many other ancient civilizations like the Egyptians, the Romans, etc., perished within few decades of invasion. How did we survive? It is all because of the continued resistance offered by our warrior ancestors in each and corner of Bharat. The invaders, for example, in the 8th century, the Arabs invaded, they attacked India. That is Aryabrat. That Aryabrat also included Sindh and Pakistan, parts of Afghanistan. So they continued with their conquests, but time and again they were all defeated. For example, in Sindh, we all know about Johars happening in Rajasthan. But the first Johar happened in 712 CE in Sindh. Rani Bai, the wife of Raja Dahir, offered resistance to the Arab invaders. And when she learned that she would be defeated. She, along with the women folk there, committed Johar. And the second Johar happened in 1226 in Bengal, Birsinghpur. After that, several episodes of Johar happened in Rajasthan. Johar also happened in Madhya Pradesh. It happened in Kampili in Karnataka. So there have been episodes of Johar happening across the country. But these stories have not been told. Now, many women committed Johar after offering resistance, after they learned that they will be defeated, they would be defeated. And then many women who were not trained in self-defense, they perished in fire without offering the resistance. And Hindutva and history. So it means Hindu history or history in Hinduism, history about the Hindu resistance or everything that comes within the fold of Hinduism. So this particular historical series of historical events have not been taught in our academic history books. The reason why the Indians, ever since independence, they do not want to read about the last 1,000 years. So in our history books, we all have read who Akbar is, who Mahmud of Ghazni is, who Aurangzeb is, who Lord Dalhousie is. We have read in detail about the invaders. But we haven't read about who Mullah Gabaru is. We haven't read about who Kapaya Nayaka is. We haven't read about who Samgrama Raja is, Samgrama Raja of Kashmir. So there have been thousands and thousands of our warriors, and including the common man, who offered resistance over time. And they did not allow the invaders to rule for a longer period. For example, the Islamic invaders could not penetrate into the northeast. Even though they attacked the northeast several times, they could not establish their rule because the rulers there offered resistance and they won. They emerged victorious. The first invasion happened in 1206. Prithu from the Khen dynasty was then the ruler of Assam, Kamrupa. Bhaktiyar Khilji, after destroying several of our ancient universities, Nalanda University, where students from across the world came and studied there, Telhara University, likewise, he destroyed several other universities, he destroyed forts, he converted many Hindus and Buddhists to Islam, he committed genocide, and after that, he advanced towards Assam. His main objective was to conquer Tibet. But he couldn't move beyond Kamrupa, beyond Guwahati, because the Raja Prithu, along with a confederacy of the neighboring rulers, they offered resistance and they emerged victorious. Bhaktiyar Khilji somehow saved his life, and he remained, because of the wounds inflicted in his body, he remained bedridden for a few months until he was assassinated by one of his own men. So if he would have not been wounded, then he would have committed more plunders, he would have destroyed more such of our knowledge, heritage, etc. But have we read about Prithu? Is there any mention about Prithu in our academic textbooks? So this is the invaders' history that we have been studying. Almost 3 to 4 generations of Hindus after independence have been studying the invaders' story. Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican-born sociologist and politician, he rightly said, a country's people without the knowledge of their past history, heritage, and culture is like a tree without roots. So we are deprived of our Hindutva history, we are deprived of our true history. So we are like a tree without roots. And thanks to the digital revolution, because of the social media, most of us are now aware about our true history. At least if we have not studied about the true history of India in our academic textbooks, we are at least knowing about our rich culture and heritage and our history through social media. And because these stories of the warriors have not been told in our history books, academic history books, I have written 2 books, Saffron Swords. So each part contains 52 episodes of valor of our warrior ancestors from each and every corner of Bharat from the 8th century to 1947. So altogether 104 episodes. So there will be more volumes coming up. So as long as I breathe, I will continue writing about our warriors. So that will be a tribute to the warriors who sacrificed their lives, because of whom we are here carrying forward the legacy of our thousands of years old civilizational identity. Now, about the chronological history of India, we have not been taught the true historical events that took place in India, at least if we say about the resistance of for the survival of the civilization from the 8th century to 1947, we have not been told about the true history. But at the same time, we have not been taught about the true chronology of India. So if you search Wikipedia or if you read in the academic books, our most ancient period starts, for example, the Vedic period starts from some 1500 BCE. But archaeological evidences, epigraphic records, and various other evidences tell us that the Vedic civilization started at least 17,000 years ago. Many scholars have been working on this, and there is a book called The Chronology of India by Vibir Arya. It is there in 4 volumes. This book contains a comprehensive list of all the dynasties that ruled from the Vedic period, all the dynasties from each and every corner of India. And if like there are 4 or 5 more scholars whose work matches with this book. For example, according to the Chronology of India by Vibir Arya, the Mahabharata war took place in the year 3162 BCE. So at least some 5,300, 200 to 300 years ago. But in our academic books, the Ramayana events and the Mahabharata events are not considered history. These are tagged under mythology. But these are true historical events. So where are, like for example, the Cholas in the south, they have a record of ruling the southern part of the country during the Vedic period as well. And the book, Vibir Arya's book, contains the list of the kings who ruled during the Vedic period in the south. So the chronological history of India needs to be changed too, along with the true history. And then what about the excavations? The excavations have been taking place across the country that tell us about the advanced civilization of ancient India. And then about our roots. For example, excavations in the Narmada River Valley led to the discovery of a skull called the Narmada Nensis. It is a skull of a 20-year-old woman. It's a Homo erectus skull. It dates back to at least 6 lakh years old. So, but this should be there in the history books, but it is not there. Then we all know about the Toba eruption that took place, that happened in Indonesia, that destroyed an entire civilization spread across miles and miles. So traces of the Toba eruption ashes have been found at Jwalapuram in Andhra Pradesh, and also various river belts in the Deccan Plateau. So which means 75,000 years ago, there was a civilization in India that is destroyed because of the volcano. And then we all know about the Indus Valley civilization because we have read in detail in our books. But there have been excavations of various more civilizations. Say, for example, the Asurgarh Fort excavations. There are traces of tiled floors have been found there. So 2,500 years ago to 3,000 years ago, people in their houses used tiles. And I, along with my husband, have been visiting ancient temples, gurukuls, etc., across the country since the last 16 years. When we came across a 2-story gurukul at Kadwaha in Madhya Pradesh, there we found toilets in the first floor. Dedicated, these toilets were used by the acharyas. The toilets, that we use today, the type of toilets that we use today. So I was very surprised, like in the 12th century, those toilets were used. Then there is a diary, a stone diary in the terrace, in that Gurukul, that has records of pilgrims and especially pilgrims who visited the Gurukul and stayed there. This, according to the inscriptions found at this Gurukul, it was run by donations given by respective kings and wealthy traders. So in ancient times, there have been a tradition, like Arvind Sarmaji said, like the medical facilities were free. Even the education was free, and the education, medical facilities to pilgrims, and various other facilities were all facilitated by donations given by respective kings and wealthy merchants. So then there is a book called The Beautiful Tree. The British conducted a survey around 1800, I don't remember the exact year. So the British conducted a survey. According to the survey, there were lakhs of gurukuls. Most of the gurukuls were in the temple premises. So there were lakhs of gurukuls spread across the surveyed area. That is the south of India, the central India, and in the Mumbai area. So if the survey was conducted in the northern part or northeastern part, then more such facts would have been discovered. And the British destroyed this educational system because, as I said, the gurukuls and institutions stood on donations because of the invasions over time. And after British, at least during Islamic invasion, most of these gurukuls survived because even when the Hindu kings stopped donating, the locals there, they continued to donate. And that's the Gurukul continued functioning. But after the British came, they stopped all of this. So we all know about this. Have you heard about the Sannyasi rebellion? In 1775 to 85, there was a series of rebellions that took place in parts of Odisha, Bengal. So the pilgrims, they used to come from all over the country to Puri. And the people there used to donate for their survival. And because the British intervened, they could not survive. Like their stay in ashrams, gurukuls, or temple premises was forbidden by the British. And because of so much of restrictions and to oust the British out of India, the several sadhus, they together fought against the British. In at least 3 battles, the sannyasis defeated the British. They killed several British generals and lieutenants in those battles. But this story of Hindu survival, this Hindutva story, is not being taught in our history books. Yeah. So it will go on and on. Like, what is the situation in Manipur now? We all know the true story actually is not being told. The media is focused on a one-sided narrative. So I'm a Vishnupriya Manipuri. I draw my line I trace my ancestry to Apappa, who is the 6th generation from Bhagruvahana, from Arjuna Chitrangada. Chitrangada was the princess of Manipur, and we all know about Arjuna. So Apappa is our Kuldevata. So there are 2 sections of Manipuris, Meitei Manipuri and Vishnupriya Manipuri. Now, even most of the Vishnupriya Manipuris, most of the Meitei Manipuris, they do not know about their ancestry. The reason why many are converting to Christianity, most of the Northeast is already a Christian-dominated region. Hindus, in today's times, Hindus are a minority in at least 8 states, including 1 union territory. So in Manipur also, the conversion is happening fast. According to B.N. Allen, a British person who recorded the recorded about the number of population in terms of religion. According to B.N. Allen, in 1901, there were only 8 Christians in Manipur. Today, they are more than 11 point something lakhs. They constitute the majority in Manipur. Now, most of the Manipuris, they converted to Christianity or Islam uh, due to marriage alliances. Like those who married to the other religions, they converted. In today's context, if you ask the Manipuris, they do not know about their history. So they, all of us, if you go through Wikipedia and all, they follow this religion called Sanamahism.
Actually, you are going into many directions. If you could limit yourself to the points made, and also please wrap up because we have to have some discussion on the.
Yes. I'm so sorry. So I'll just to wind up. I wanted to discuss on few points pointed out by Arvind Sarmaji, but we'll do that later. Yeah. So thank you so much for listening to me.
No, I think you have raised some very interesting points, but they are a little away from the discussion. We'll probably come back to it at some point of time. But let me now request Dr. Ankur Kakkar, if you could limit yourself to the points made by Mr. Sharma. Thank you. And take about 10-12 minutes. We'll come back to the discussion.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Hello. Yes. Thank you. Namaste. Thank you, Dr. Arvind Gupta ji. I would like to really thank the Vivekananda International Foundation for having me for this wonderful lecture on Hindutva and history. I am truly honored to share the stage with Professor Arvind Sharma, Manoshi Sinha ji, and Professor Shashi Prabha Kumar ji. It's truly an honor to be here. We have very less time, so I'll not be able to share my full presentation with you. I'll try to stick to the point as Dr. Arvind ji has requested. It has been really interesting to hear both the speakers, and the topic for today is Hindutva and history. So, as we have been discussing, there are so many different aspects of Hindutva. Yeah, you can define it in various ways. You can define it culturally, religiously, politically. There are so many different aspects. But I think when we talk about Hindutva and history and what is the perspective of Hindutva of history, we first must define what we really mean by Hindutva and how Hindutva can approach history. So I'll just very briefly discuss the definitions of Hindutva that have been given by our original thinkers like Veer Savarkar, Sri Aurobindo, Rabindranath Tagore, and many others, especially in the last 100 years, to be able to get a framework of Hindutva and how then we should approach history from the perspective of Hindutva. So let me just begin by. So, according to Sri Aurobindo, Hinduism is a spiritual journey. He equated Hinduism with different things. For example, he said, what is Hinduism? First comes the idea of the one existence of the Veda, to whom the sages give different names, the one without a second of the Upanishads. The second basic idea is the various ways in which we approach the divine. The third idea is the supreme divine, who is approached through a universal consciousness, and every individual can approach the divine in his own way, in his own part. So this is how Sri Aurobindo defined Hinduism. Veer Savarkar said Hindutva is the same thing as Bhartiyata, or people who are from Bharat Bhumi. Every person is a Hindu who regards and owns this Bharat Bhumi, this land from the Indus to the seas, as his fatherland as well as his holy land. That is the land of the origin of his religion, the cradle of his faith. This definition, therefore, according to Veer Savarkar, should be recognized by the government and made the test of Hindutva in enumerating the population of Hindus in the government census to come. Rabindranath Tagore then, so obviously people were identifying Hinduism with Bharatiyata and with Bharat Bhumi and the culture of Bharatvarsh. What was the essence of this culture? And this is something which comes up very beautifully in Rabindranath Tagore's quote, in which he equates Hindutva with the fundamental principle of unity in diversity, which is fundamentally a spiritual principle. We find, he says, Rabindranath Tagore says, we find a single objective that has been motivating Bharatvarsh. This objective has been to establish unity among diversity, to make various paths move towards one goal, to experience the one in many as the innermost reality, to pursue with total certitude the supreme principle of inner unity which runs through the differences. It has been her endeavor to achieve these without destroying the distinctions that appear in the external world. The ability to perceive this oneness in the diversity and to strive to extend unity are the native characteristics of Bharatvarsh. Now, having quoted these three great thinkers of Hindutva, the point I'm trying to make is when we are arriving at or endeavoring to arrive at a fundamental framework or definition of Hindutva, we realize that the thinkers try to define it in terms of a principle, a harmonizing principle that looks at underlying unity, that looks at oneness rather than only as at differences. So when we look at the perspective of Hindutva of history, we should keep this framework in mind and look at our history from this perspective of Hindutva. That means we should look at our history as uh, not as a series of different things that happened or as a set of diverse different regions or as a set of diverse different kingdoms that came one after the other. We should look at fundamental unity that was there. What was the fundamental unity? Where can we find this unity within the diversity? So there is a layer of diversity, of course. Underlying that layer is a layer of unity, and this is what the original thinkers of Hindutva stressed upon. Unfortunately, our textbooks or standard academic textbooks, as Manushiji was also pointing out, have given us a narrative that looks at the differences rather than as as a unified narrative. This is the major problem. I'll just show you uh, an example. So from the perspective of Hindutva, the history of the Hindus cannot be a diverse set of unrelated events scattered across time and space, the way that our academic textbooks have been structured. For example, we are taught about the so-called Aryan invasion, and then the Harappan civilization, and then the followed by the period of the Buddha and the Mauryan Empire, and so on and so forth. What then appears, the impression that a student receives on reading this structure of history is that Indian history or the history of Bharatvarsh is a history of unrelated scattered events which have no connection with each other whatsoever, and the regions of India have also no connection with each other whatsoever. This is in contradiction to the idea of Hindutva that the thinkers, our original thinkers, have propounded. Now, how do we counter this? So, when we write a history of Hindutva or a history of Bharatvarsh from the perspective of Hindutva, we need to keep in mind the framework unity in diversity. So, we look at a unified narrative, not at differences. We look at a common universal. What was the universal consciousness of Bharatvarsh rather than looking at specific different kings or different regions? Even in this, for example, even if we have to talk about the history of kings and kingdoms, what is often taught about is like we are taught about the history of the Pallavas differently, the Cholas differently, the Rashtrakutas, the Chalukyas differently. What we are not taught is the commonness. A lot of the kings derive their ancestry and claim their ancestry from heroes and characters in the Mahabharata. There are a lot of examples of this. We are not taught this. We are not, there is no place for the Mahabharata and Ramayana in our standard textbooks. The result is that there is no, we don't get this unified narrative to which these people have drawn from which they have drawn inspiration. So there is a lack of a unified narrative. This is just an example of the problem in the history narrative as opposed to the Hindutva narrative of history. So when we say the Hindutva narrative of history, what we really mean is the essential Indian narrative of history, which includes the Indian consciousness, the consciousness of the nation, that perspective of that. So that has to come out in the history. If that is not coming out in the history, it's not a history from a Hindutva point of view. It's a history from a professional point of view, as Professor Arvind Sharma ji was talking about. So he told us about the difference between professional historians and Hindutva historians. One example he gave was that professional historians view only the British colonial rule as the foreign rule, whereas Hindutva historians view the Islamic rule also as a colonial foreign rule along with the British rule, because of the fact that the Hindutva consciousness is something that was not, it was attacked in, let's say, the period of Muslim rule, and in many ways, different ways. So I'll give two examples now in response to both the speakers to illustrate my point here. The first example is in response to Manushree Sinhaji's talk about the uh, Kshatriya Parampara. So I think she has shown very wonderfully in her work, the Saffron Swords, how there were waves after waves of successive Kshatriyas who fought very bravely and resisted invaders, whether it was the Islamic invaders or the British colonial forces. Uh, this tradition of Kshatriya Parampara is something that we have yet to understand and highlight in our historical narrative. This shows us now why how is this connected with Hindutva? So it shows that all of these Kshatriyas who came one after the other and again repeatedly defended and bravely resisted the invasions, they were defending something for sure. They were defending something in common. They had something in common. They had an idea of Hindutva. They were defending the idea of Hindutva. That's why they were fighting. Whether it was the in the 16th century, it was the Vijayanagar Empire. We use the word Hindu for the first time, as Professor Sharma has shown in his paper on Hindutva. The title was Hindu Surat Ratna, if I'm not mistaken. Then it was Shivaji who used Hindu Swaraj. He was defending Hindutva. And then, of course, after that, wave after wave of successive Kshatriyas came and they were defending Hindutva. So, unless we understand Hindutva and what they were defending, we will be only looking at separate chapters of history and different warriors who fought. What were they fighting for? Why were they fighting? Unless we understand their inspiration, their motivation, and their defense of Hindutva, then we don't have a Hindutva perspective of history. Also, the Kshatriya Parampara, which has been pointed out by several scholars, was in harmony with the Brahma Parampara. So, in India, as I said, unity and diversity means inclusion. It's a harmonizing, Hindutva is a harmonizing principle. We harmonize the different aspects. Kshatriyas were in harmony with the Brahmins, and all these Kshatriyas that we have been studying about were inspired and worked in collaboration, or they were guided by the gurus. Right from the time of Mahabharata, Arjuna was guided by Krishna. It symbolizes the harmony of the Kshatriya and the Brahmin spirit. Right down to Shivaji Maharaj, he guided by Samat Ramdas, as you all know. So this spirit of harmony, this spirit of this is Hindutva. Hindutva is basically this harmonizing principle, where the Kshatriya Parampara is in harmony with the Brahma Parampara. And what are they defending? They are defending Hindutva. So they're following Hindutva and they're defending Hindutva. So the Hindutva is the driving principle. They are also defending Hindutva because they are defending a certain kind of consciousness. That is the Hindutva perspective of history. So this is one example. The second example, second example is a response to Professor Sharma's comment on social inclusion and his reference to education and temples, for example. So my research has been on education, and I have been blessed to be guided by Professor Dharampalji's daughter, Geeta Dharampalji, who was my PhD supervisor. So Dharampalji's work, as you know, is titled The Beautiful Tree, in which he published various surveys of the British on indigenous Indian education. And what do these surveys tell us? They tell us that all the social classes from all the different castes were included in the Indian education system. So if you look at the data that comes out from these reports, it is that these pathshalas that were prevalent in the 18th century and the 19th century, when these surveys were carried out, all the social classes, all the castes, they have the proper analysis. I have the tables with me, I can show you if you want. The whole caste wise specific names of the castes are given who attended these pathshalas, and all of them are included. So no caste was excluded from the education system, as is often told to us. So this is the Hindutva narrative again is a unified narrative. It is not a disjointed narrative. And because of this Hindutva narrative only, we can understand why all these social classes were included in the education system. Of course, there were exceptions and there were distortions later on. Uh, and then the use of temples, as Professor Sharma has very beautifully pointed out, the temple was a hub of education. The temple was a hub of education, it was a hub of culture, it was a hub of economy. Why was the temple a hub of education? Because the temple was a place where everybody went. So, and the temple was a place where everybody had to meet all their requirements. So in a temple, you had to have priests, of course, and purohits to perform the puja. You had to have potters who had to make the pots, the kalash. You had to have people who were. You had to have dance and music. That was part of the ritual. So you had to have dancers and musicians. You had to have a whole range of people and a whole section of society to be able for the temple to perform its rituals and for the whole ecosystem to function fully. And that is why the temple became a place and a hub of culture and of education. And also, it came to include all the social classes. So, I am glad that Professor Sharma has guided us and shown us that how the temple can serve as a archetypal model of social inclusion for Hindutva. Because Hindutva, by definition, means social inclusion. And because of this fundamental principle of inclusion and, as I said, unity in diversity, we need to look at our history, whether it is the warriors or it is the education system or it is the any period of history. We have to look at it from this perspective of Hindutva. Only then can we say we are writing a Hindu view of history. Otherwise, we are just writing a professional history. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those very focused remarks. And now we'll open it up for a discussion. But I would request you to also take up the question which Professor Sharma raised right in the beginning, whether Hindutva has failed on the political and military front. And I think the corollary to that is, if it has failed, then what should we do about it? And naturally, the comparisons will be then made about other religions and how, what is the political dimension of other religions and how this is relevant today. And what direction will Hindutva take if, this political and military dimension is included in a very apparent way. And, Hindutva for all of us, including me, has been spiritual so far. We've not really thought about the political and the military. Of course, Mahabharata, etc., is all about war, but this about dharma and again defending some very key principles. And of course, Hindutva has been defined by and large in terms of oneness. Now, when you talk about oneness, then oneness with what? I mean, what about the oneness with the opposite? Is it oneness only amongst ourselves, or is it that those who are totally different from us, there is also this oneness? I think these questions come and then they tend to confuse people, including myself. And then this difference between Hindutva and Hinduism, is it real difference, or is it there's no difference, or there's only nuanceical? And when we are separately having lectures on Gita also. Every month we have this Gita, and where we also discuss some of these issues. And young minds are here, so I think they will have some questions. So let me open this for discussion. Sujit.
Thank you for those very three different perspectives, and thank you in particular to Dr. Professor Sharma for this entire series and raising such fundamental issues. I want to you all to reflect